Welcome to Daswan Hunt. I'm Jean-Pierre Ruth for Information Week. And in this episode, we are going to be taking a look at the top three principles that define a CIO or CTO or C-suite tech leadership's role in their organizations. We're in a time where responsibilities and the duties that these leaders might have seem to be changing, evolving. It could be a matter of strategy within the organization is evolving. It could be that there's different technology that is coming into place that is then changing the strategy and the needs for the organizations. And also there might be other roles that pop up within the organization and figuring out, okay, where do I fit now? Where do they fit within the masthead of what we're doing? So for this episode, we are joined by Matt Lyteson, CIO for IBM.
Hi.
And Phillip Goericke, CTO for NMI.
Hey, happy to be here, JP.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you both for being here today. Okay, Matt, I was hoping you could start us off. What are three top principles that have been that you've held to that define your role as a CIO?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And it's kind of interesting in preparing for this. I'm like, I haven't really thought about it in terms of key principles. So it's a little bit of a homework exercise for me. But I thought it was really useful because I think a lot of aspiring CIOs or CTOs kind of ask themselves, like, what does it take? And I really was able to sum it up. And I think three aspects of that. I think the first is around trust. So that's both doing what you say you're going to do and meeting the commitments to our various stakeholders and constituencies across the enterprise, or even perhaps externally for some roles, and building that trust through the relationships and doing that. But that's really the foundation and kind of non-negotiable that I start with. The second is what I call the know and grow principle. I think as the ever changing technology landscape faces us, our jobs, and as you kind of highlighted a second ago, our jobs continue to change. And it's important that folks in these technical leadership roles both understand the technology itself, what's here today, what's coming next. That's the grow part. But I think this is perhaps different than maybe organizations in the past would have treated the CIO role as just another senior leadership role, senior executive role across the organization. And maybe they needed to be a generalist, finding more that understanding both the aspects of the technology and the business are more important, and appreciating that that's going to change. And that's an opportunity for us to grow as part of that. And the third principle more gets into the emotional aspects. I call it let it go, because we are faced and bombarded with a number of challenges. Maybe things aren't going the right way. Maybe we're dealing with emotions from other people. But I learned that very on in my career, where I'm not responsible for your emotions. And so I need to make sure I'm aware of that. I can be accountable and responsible for my own. But that's really what I call it, the level let it go principles, so that we can be prepared to face what's coming next and not get bogged down by maybe what's going on in the moment. So again, the trust, the know and grow, and let it go are my three principles.
Gotcha. Awesome. Very, very good principles to have pillars to build on. Thank you so much for that. All right, Phillip, your turn. What are the top three principles that really help define your role? In your case, CTO. What have really you held on to?
Well, number one, Matt, those are really great principles. I think we share a lot of similar philosophies. And kind of like you said at the beginning, it's not something I have a sticky note on my window here that I look at every day. But as I've thought about these are things that I think I imbibe and I bring as a part of my daily routine is in the CTO role. And that's first, leading with clarity. Because as a CTO, you're often sitting at the intersection of chaos, lots of it, emerging tech, fires, infrastructure issues, shifting strategies, customer needs that are evolving. And my job is to bring clarity to that noise so that we can be that most scalable lever for business growth. That does mean things like aligning our organization around what matters, why it matters, making sure people understand that, and the trade-offs we have to make. Because clarity really creates velocity that makes us go faster, decision making go faster. The second thing that I think is a key principle of mine is building systems that scale people. Because in tech, we're architecting platforms and infrastructure, but the highest leverage systems that I'm aware of are built for people to scale. That means things like team structure, of course, onboarding, cross-functional collaboration, the rituals that we have in our delivery cycles, and clarity around those business goals. I think that's really scaling the engineering organism, not just our tech stack. And then finally, I think it's staying close to the customer, not just the technology. I used to pride myself personally on being very deeply technical, and I still love a good hard technical problem to solve. But I believe real leverage comes when you understand the customer, truly understand them. So, what are we actually solving? Where are we introducing friction for the user? Tech's really only valuable to those customers when it disappears, and it seems like magic, right? So, the coolest tech in the world really doesn't mean anything if it doesn't solve a customer problem. So again, kind of summarizing that again, that's the clarity, leading with the clarity, and building systems that scale our people and staying close to our customer, not just technology.
Gotcha. All right. Great principles for you as well. Appreciate all of your thoughts. Okay, great. All right. For both of you now, again, taking back to the topic, the main topic, with this changing landscape of responsibility, what are some things that you really hold on to kind of guide you as things evolve around you, as things are sometimes you might be the one that is driving some of the change, but as things might be more malleable in certain places, what do you kind of really hold on to kind of like be your kind of like your through line?
Yeah, Philip, you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. I think Matt, you said a few things that I would have, in my mind, I'm thinking about here. But there's a few things I'm thinking about. It's the concept of agility, not just the current flavor of an agile, methodology, whatever it is, the one of the day, but the concept of business agility and adaptability. You've got to have a culture that expects change, and that's what you were getting at a minute ago, Matt. Because that world is changing super fast, and what works today in this quarter may be outdated tomorrow, and that's normal. And so knowing that is essential to that maintaining the changing landscape. I also think that having strong feedback loops is really something that guides me. If you're not getting good signals, I think like a vehicle driving down the road, if it doesn't have lots of sensors that are picking up, the velocity of of the wheels, and the sensors in front of you, and rain and all kinds of things like that, your car is going to not go where you want it to, potentially get in an accident. And so you have to have systems that allow for continuous input and learning so that you can course correct when you need to. And then I would probably end with saying, I think transparency and communication is paramount. I've just found time and time again that if without this transparency and summarizing at high levels with your team, it leads to bad outcomes. And it's not just within your team, but across the whole organization, including with your customers. That transparent communication, it really drives the alignment that is essential to move forward and guide us as we try to take on this new future.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add to what Philip was saying from my perspective. I like to sum it up as curiosity in science. I mean, if I were just to be very succinct about it, I think everything that Philip described around agility, the transparent communication, knowing the context, all those in my mind, if we're forced to run more and more science experiments. We are playing with new technology, even in broad transformation initiatives where, a decade ago or 15 years ago, we would have said that, hey, we're going to be on a 24-month journey. No one does that anymore. We don't have time. And so we're forced to run with the new evolving technology, more and more experiments. So are we clear on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve with that? Are we clear on how we design the experiment? Are we looking at the data, whether that's the input and insights and feedback mechanisms that Philip was describing a minute ago? And then also expecting that we maybe don't have the right experiment here or there, or a hypothesis was invalid. I think that's where the curiosity comes. And I think that helps to maintain that speed, that velocity, the agility, that transparency that organizations require in order to be successful and ultimately help their overall enterprises be successful in this dynamic changing landscape.
I love your hypothesis experimentation thing. I think we share so much of our background from what I'm learning here. That is so paramount, Matt. the scientific method, if you will, to running businesses. Like, you don't know what the future holds, and being able to make a smart guess quickly and test it and evolve it, eliminate it if need be. That I love what you've said there, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings all the agility that you were talking about. And I think trying to get our stakeholders to a point where they can understand, yeah,
Yeah.
this is an experiment versus I think old days we would have run, well, let's do a proof of concept or a proof of value. Okay. And then we aren't really sure what we accomplish. It kind of works. And then
Yep.
folks like you and myself are forced to run that in production, and then it's there for the next decade. And then finally we do a rationalization exercise looking at, do we still really need that? And we're like, that's kind of odd that that would have gotten in there. We don't have time for that. We don't have the resources for that anymore. So
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Speaking to the, those that guidance and those principles, where did you each of you learn really the lessons behind them? Was it a matter of, this is something from something they held on to from academics, something from on the job, things from outside of both? Where and it could be multiple places where you picked up different things that really helped you say, okay, this is what I need to bring into this role.
am I allowed to include my therapist on that? I'm
Absolutely.
just kind of some days it feels like that. I mean, look, I really try to take a multidisciplinary approach. I didn't go to school for technology. I'm a musician by trade. That's decades ago, so it almost doesn't count with the way that the world was changing. But I always like to look at multiple disciplines, and especially like Philip and I are expected to maintain our acumen on technology and what's changing. That is a basic expectation of the job. So I wouldn't say that that helps you to be an exemplar technology leader. I think being able to apply a multidisciplinary approach. What can I learn from astrophysics? What can I learn from psychology and human behavior? What can I learn from environmental science, for example? What can I learn from art, where they are also solving complex problems and challenges and applying those? They're interacting with humans the same way that we do, and everyone's using machines and computers for that. So I like to look at a variety of different sources in order to keep me fresh, to understand how do I different need to differentiate. An example, when I started in the IBM organization about 6 years ago, I learned that there was a very, I would say, classical economics approach. So I started asking myself, how could I implement behavioral economics within the CIO environment in order to drive some of the behaviors that I saw that we needed to do in order to transform in the way that we were designing things for. That was a little bit new, but I wouldn't have even known about behavioral economics if I hadn't been reading and learning about those concepts that were arguably a little bit outside of the field of technology.
Matt, the more I hear about you, the more I like you. You cut from the same cloth here. It's similar. I don't think it's one particular avenue in life that I've learned these things from. It has been watching YouTube psychology videos on. I have two young kids, like how to raise kids. Those kids. I've learned so many lessons about that. How I work with my teams, all kinds of stuff. But I think early in my career, I saw great engineers get stuck in situations where priorities just were not clear. And you would hear things like, we don't have a clear vision, or priorities are always changing. And it certainly felt that way because they didn't know what was going on. And I learned that in my role, it's important that, not solve every problem, but to bring clarity and consistency so those problems can be solved by those teams. Another thing that I vividly remember this years ago now, but this was a pretty core memory for me. Is it was a very technically ambitious data migration. It doesn't matter. I won't name the specifics because I don't want to trigger anybody that may be listening. But it was a big data migration. It looked great on paper, but what we didn't really validate the problem that it solved, or the customer problem, the business problem. And because of that, it lacked a real strategy and stakeholder alignment across our business. And ultimately, after spending a lot of time on it and a lot of money, it got scrapped. And it taught me that never build that a solution in search of the problem. We've probably heard that before. That was my core memory of that lesson. And then maybe the last thing I'll mention is the scaling people, the systems that scale people. Is I've seen many examples of this, but the one I'm thinking of is in the infrastructure world. Infrastructure teams, they were getting burnt out and they were relying on heroics. They didn't have structure. They were constantly firefighting. And once we introduced things, quick changes, organizational changes like functional specialization and cross training and ruthless prioritization of what are the critical problems that we need to solve first, we created real breathing room and we saw immediate results. So yeah, there's been lots of ways I've learned these lessons, mostly through real world being in the trenches and seeing it. But those are what I would tell you.
I love what you said there, Philip, with the clarity and consistency on there. I use those words myself, and I add to that a third C, which is conciseness, because people don't want to hear me just ramble on and on. But without the clarity about what are the outcomes you're trying to accomplish, to your point, not necessarily the solution that you're trying to build, like in your data migration solution, that is absolutely critical. And then using those same words over and over again, because if there's one thing that I've learned on my journey is that the words matter, and you say one thing slightly different, and someone, maybe English isn't their first language, English is my first language, they may interpret that a different way than I had intended. So spend a lot of time going through what are the specific words and phrases that we're going to use to clearly communicate the rationale, our strategy, and then to be consistent about that every single time that we're talking about the strategy and why we're doing certain things, the outcome that we're trying to achieve.
That is a great advice, Matt.
Gotcha. All right. I want to jump to the boot camp question for both of you. Take us through your personal boot camp, if you will, for a CIO or CTO. Let's talk about any books that you read, any thought leaders that you pay attention to, or ones that you avoid paying attention to, or folks or things that have stood out as inspiration to you. It could be a mentor, moment that kind of like really has helped your approach in your role.
I don't mind starting this one. In terms of books, I really wish I was that guy that every night I was reading a book. I aspire to be that person someday. But I tend to have learned more through experiences and conversations than just reading books every day. But there have been a few that I think were notable. There's one that's just fun. I would recommend this to anybody. It's just a great read. It's like a fiction sort of story, but it like really connects with the tech space. That's the Phoenix Project, bit old at this point, but really changed how I think about organizations as systems and the importance of workflows and feedback loops and shared goals across the organization. Another one for how I give feedback, and this has been a big part of how I coach, is radical candor. I think that was Kim Scott, if I'm not mistaken. The caring about the individual, I think, is at the heart of this book, and I have a personal interest in you and care about you, and realizing that a tough conversation that I may not want to have with you is actually a disservice to you. So that's been a big influence for me. What got you here won't get you there. Another one I'd say. But there are podcasts, part of my boot camp. I think All In, Lex Friedman, for example, just some great perspectives, just totally diverse. You have no idea what they're going to be about, but just kind of you find little nuggets and random things. You're like, I can apply that to this thing going on. And then I've honestly learned as much from leaders who've gotten it wrong, so to speak, as from those who got it right. But finding the gift in every failure, setback, or conflict is something that is a relatively new, thought leadership lesson for me, because it's easy to spiral when things are going off track. There's always some sort of gift in there, and I think that's that growth mindset. There's a psychological trick when you focus on what you're going to learn, it's just like a light switch in your brain. Another good one is that the outcomes over output, as Matt was just saying, because shipping a ton of features that don't change user behavior, for example, it doesn't move the needle. It's just noise. And then maybe one to not to lead, lacking transparency, trying to keep it too high level and not providing context, thinking that you're going to save someone some frustration or whatever. And maybe even letting your personal stress flow down to your team, and dictating instructions rather than inspiring. I've found that like the inspirational approach, my personal journey here, but the inspirational approach has greater dividends in me being able to tell people what to do. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, and I think we both probably grew up and had that experience of what not to do. I remember senior technical executive just yelling at a team during the middle of the incident, and I'm like, that's one thing I am not going to do. Like, there's no
Yeah.
reason for it. Handle your emotions, because I could see that just the toll that that took on the team. And I was right in there, the thick of it, and trying to fix things with everyone else. And like, that does not help. You're not going to make a server reboot faster because you're yelling at someone and raising your voice. And we're all in this together. I think some of, similar to what Philip said, and I am going to disagree with you on one point. I did not like the Phoenix project, but not because of the message, but because I'm a little bit of a literary nut, and I could not handle the lack of character development and the depth of characters in that. I'm like, the story is great,
All right,
the allegory is great, but I need a little bit more depth to the characters than they're giving me here.
that's
But
fine.
all kidding aside, some of the recent ones, obviously, like I'm a fan of Adam Grant and Hidden Potential, a book that he did a couple years ago. There's obviously what's the Revenge of the Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell that came out, and then another one, the author's slipping my mind, called 4,000 Weeks, which really talks about we've got a finite amount of time, and where are you going to focus your time and energy, and ways to think about your life. And I think when we talk about, we spend all of our time in work and doing important things for our enterprises, and then we spend a lot of time with our families and friends. What's the right mix of that, and how do we rethink that so that we're able to get the most out of the finite amount of time that we've got on this planet?
Awesome thoughts. All right, so let's wrap up with this question. How has your role, or the role for the CTO and CIO changed from when you got started? And what are some things that you wish you knew from those early days? I mean, of course, there are things that have emerged, since then that probably couldn't have been predicted. But really, how has the landscape changed, for you personally, but also as you see for your peers as well?
Take it away, Matt.
All right. So I think I'll start with the part of the question. What do I wish I would have known? I would say that people in the C-suite are humans too. I think sometimes earlier in our career, we're like, wow, that's, very interesting people. And then people start looking at you that way, and you're like, I'm just another human, right? I have the same problems. My car breaks down the same as yours, that sort of thing. And then I think I mentioned it earlier, words do matter, and being very clear on what it is that you want to try to communicate and spending the extra time on that. I think we minimize that a little bit. As far as for how the role is changing, I think, look, technology is clearly a more important role in every single enterprise. There's some people that say every enterprise is a technology company now, and because they need to leverage and really get the value out of their technological investments, unlike 20, 30 years ago, where it was part of the operation. Now everything is driven by technology. Companies are trying to catch up on that. And what this means for roles like ours is that you need to have both the appreciation for technology as well as for understanding how the business fundamentally operates, so that we can have conversations about where are we injecting technology at the right point in time to be able to improve how the business operates, or how we're getting revenue in digital ways, how we're managing risk through that. I think that is a fundamental change, where before it's a, hey, I just need to know the tech stuff. I don't need to know how the business operates. Or conversely, I just need to know how the business operates. I don't need to understand technology. These things are blending more and more. And I think CIOs, CTO, CDO roles are right at the intersection of that. And depending on which organization you are, you may be on a different spot in that spectrum, but I think that's really the fundamental change that's happened over the last couple of years, especially now that everyone wants to get AI into every piece of their operation.
So good, and so much in common here again. I'll reiterate or underscore what you talked about, the humanizing of the C-suite. I think that I very naively I kind of thought of them as not, like not humans or something like that. Like, they're missing the facts. Why are they not doing this? They don't get it right. I mean, I realized that they're often choosing between multiple bad options, right? So, if you're listening to this podcast and you have a similar sort of way of thinking about that, have some empathy, because these are people, humans doing their very best with what they got. And another thing that maybe this has changed for me, but it's sort of like that, not having to have all the answers, you can't be everywhere at once, sort of thing. But I've learned that job is really about building the environment where others can make great decisions without you, a place where those answers and solutions emerge naturally. And the T-shaped leadership we've all heard. I think that what got many of us here to this place was being very good in the vertical, the deep aspect, and maybe less in the horizontal. I think that's something that is very important nowadays, especially as tech is being accelerated with AI. That we've got to get really good at the horizontal aspect of the T. And then I will just kind of double down on this AI one here. There's something that's very fundamental changing. You never even thought to optimize for this, but the way AI, especially the agentic AI, is accelerating the velocity of delivering new working software. We now find ourselves being like, oh, well, we've eliminated this bottleneck that is exposing other bottlenecks that we knew were there, but we just didn't care about because it clearly was not the real bottleneck. It was the time to make code work. But now that that's going down significantly, we're like, oh shoot, well, how do we train our salespeople quickly enough on new features because it's a new pace for them, or marketing that, or product having the capacity to do more market research because backlogs are shrinking. And so there's a whole series of new constraints that we're having to think about because this historically massive constraint is being removed. So I think that's another one that's changing rapidly in front of our eyes right now.
Definitely appreciate your insights on that. Well, listen, Matt, Phillip, those are the questions we had for you both today. I really appreciate you coming on the show. You both have been fantastic, sharing your bit of your history, your thoughts, and the principles that have guided you. So again, I thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, likewise. It was just an enjoyable conversation too. Thanks, JP and Matt.
You can find the Das Won't Hunt podcast on Podbean, Spotify, and other popular podcast platforms.